They said humans were monsters. Savage beasts who turned entire star systems to glass and made whole species extinct with nothing but rage and primitive weapons. The Galactic Council whispered our name in the same breath as natural disasters and cosmic horrors. But, when their most precious daughter needed protection from the very enemies they couldn't face, they came crawling to the monsters they feared most. Captain Marcus Chen had killed more aliens in the war than he could count. His hands were stained with the blood of a dozen species, his conscience buried beneath years of necessary violence. He was the perfect choice for a suicide mission disguised as babysitting duty. After all, what did one more human life matter to beings who saw his entire species as expendable weapons? What they didn't expect was for the weapon to develop a heart. What they never imagined was that the monster they hired to protect their princess would become the only thing standing between their civilization and absolute annihilation. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in knowing how to destroy everything around you, it's in knowing what's worth saving. This is the story of how humanity's greatest killer became its most unlikely guardian, and how a broken soldier found redemption in the most impossible place, the trust of an innocent child who saw past the monster to find the man within. The transport ship's engines hummed with a frequency that made Marcus Chen's teeth ache. He sat in the passenger compartment's single human-sized chair, surrounded by alien delegates who whispered in languages that sounded like dying wind chimes. 3 years since the Galactic War ended, and they still couldn't look at him directly. Marcus understood their fear. He'd earned every bit of it during the 18-month conflict that had reshaped the political landscape of 3 spiral arms. The humans had been the newcomers, the primitives with their chemical rockets and kinetic weapons, dismissed as barely worth the Galactic Council's attention. That dismissal had cost them 47 worlds before they realized that humanity's apparent technological inferiority masked something far more dangerous, an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Zeltharian ambassador sitting across from him kept glancing at Marcus's left hand, where 3 fingers had been replaced with military-grade prosthetics. The chrome and carbon fiber digits moved with mechanical precision, a constant reminder of the Battle of Kepler Station where Marcus had held off an entire boarding party with nothing but a maintenance tool and his bare hands. The aliens remembered that battle too. It was where their species learned that humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to make their enemies regret ever raising weapons against them. Captain Chen, the ambassador, finally spoke, his translator rendering the complex Zeltharian clicks and whistles into flat, emotionless English. "We want to ensure you understand the gravity of this assignment." Marcus turned his pale blue eyes toward the tall, crystalline being. "I understand that your council is desperate enough to hire a human for a job your own people won't take. That tells me everything I need to know about the gravity." The ambassador's coloration shifted to a deeper purple, indicating distress. "The Vortex Syndicate has placed a bounty on Princess Lyraliai's head worth more than most planetary economies. She is the last heir to the Zentharim throne, and her bloodline carries genetic markers that make her uniquely capable of interfacing with ancient technology that could reshape galactic power structures." Ancient technology. Marcus's voice carried the weight of someone who'd heard similar claims before. "Let me guess, weapons capable of destroying entire fleets with a thought? Planet killers hidden in pocket dimensions? The same kind of ancient technology every dying empire claims they're about to unlock?" The translator couldn't capture the subtle harmonics in the ambassador's response, but Marcus caught the emotional undertones anyway. Fear. Desperate, bone-deep terror that the alien was trying very hard to hide. The Zentharim archives contain references to the architects, the species that seeded this galaxy with habitable worlds before vanishing 12 million years ago. Princess Lyraliai's neural patterns are compatible with architect interfaces in ways we've never seen before. 3 days ago, she accidentally activated a dormant architect facility on the moon Thesha Prime. The facility produced energy readings equivalent to a small star for 17 seconds before shutting down. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen architect ruins during the war, vast, impossible structures that defied understanding and occasionally killed entire research teams just by existing in proximity to thinking beings. If the girl could actually control that technology. The Vortex Syndicate learned of this incident, the ambassador continued. They've already sent 12 assassination teams. We've stopped 11 of them, but the 12th succeeded in infiltrating our inner security perimeter before we discovered them. Princess Lyralii is currently in hiding on the neutral station Babylon Gamma, but our intelligence suggests the Syndicate has assets there as well. So you need someone expendable, Marcus said. Someone skilled enough to keep her alive but human enough that losing him won't cost the Council any political capital. The ambassador's silence was answer enough. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the dossier they'd provided. The girl was young, barely 18 in Zentharim years, which translated to perhaps 16 in human terms. Her species was humanoid but, with pale blue skin marked by intricate silver patterns that indicated noble blood. Her file listed her as intelligent but sheltered, raised in the protected gardens of the Zentharim homeworld with limited exposure to the realities of galactic politics. What happened to her parents, he asked. Killed in a Vorthack raid 6 months ago. The same raid that revealed the existence of the Architect connection. Princess Lyralii is the only surviving member of her bloodline. Marcus set the dossier aside. My terms haven't changed. Full operational authority, no interference from Council agents, and complete immunity for any actions I take in the course of protecting her. I won't have some committee second-guessing my decisions when lives are on the line. Those terms are concerning to the Council. Your methods during the war were notably extreme. My methods during the war kept humanity from being exterminated, Marcus replied coolly. If you want someone who'll play by Council regulations, hire a Council agent. But they're all dead, aren't they? That's why you're here talking to a human monster instead of one of your own people. The ambassador's coloration shifted again, cycling through patterns Marcus had learned to recognize as cognitive dissonance. The alien wanted to object, to maintain some dignity, but they both knew the truth. The Vorthack Syndicate specialized in killing Council agents. Their assassination techniques had been refined over centuries of eliminating political targets across dozens of species. They were very, very good at their job. But they'd never tried to kill someone under the protection of a human veteran. There is one additional complication, the ambassador said after a long pause. Princess Lyralii has specific requirements regarding her guardian. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Such as? She believes her protector should be someone who understands loss. Someone who has faced death and survived. Someone who... The translator struggled with the final concept. Someone who has been broken and rebuilt themselves stronger. She's choosing her own bodyguard? In a manner of speaking. She refused all Council candidates. She specifically requested a human veteran, despite having never met one of your species. Her reasoning was that only someone who had endured the crucible of war would understand the weight of survival. Marcus studied the girl's picture again. There was something in her eyes, an intelligence that seemed far older than her years, and a sadness that reminded him uncomfortably of his own reflection. She'd lost everything and somehow concluded that a human soldier would understand her pain better than her own people. She might be right about that. How much does she know about what she can do, he asked. Very little. The incident on Thesha Prime was accidental. She was exploring a restricted section of the Architect ruins when she apparently activated some kind of neural interface. The facility's response was automatic, it recognized her genetic markers and attempted to download information directly into her consciousness. Attempted? The download was interrupted when our security forces breached the facility to retrieve her. She was unconscious for 6 hours afterward and claims to remember only fragments. Dreams of vast starships and empty worlds. Visions of technologies that make current galactic civilization look primitive. Marcus closed the dossier. When do we reach Babylon Gamma? 4 hours. Captain Chen, I feel obligated to warn you, the princess may not be what you expect. The incident changed her in ways we don't fully understand. She speaks of things that haven't existed for millions of years as if she experienced them personally. She sometimes refers to species and star systems by names that don't appear in any database. She's developing inherited memories from an extinct civilization. That's either going to make her incredibly valuable or completely insane. Our concern is that it may be both. The rest of the journey passed in silence. Marcus spent the time reviewing tactical assessments of Babylon Gamma's security systems and studying the psychological profiles of known Vorthack operatives. The station was a sprawling commercial hub built around the remnants of an ancient space elevator, its multiple levels and complex layout providing countless opportunities for ambush or escape depending on which side of the equation you occupied. When they finally docked, Marcus was struck by the station's contradictions. The outer levels bustled with legitimate commerce, traders from dozens of species haggling over everything from rare minerals to exotic foods. But, the deeper they descended, the more apparent it became that Babylon Gamma served as a nexus for less legal enterprises. The air grew thicker with smoke from various recreational chemicals, and the conversation shifted to languages that existed primarily in criminal underworlds. The princess was being housed in what the council euphemistically called a secure residential facility on level 7. In reality, it was a reinforced bunker built into the station's superstructure, accessible only through a series of increasingly paranoid security checkpoints. Marcus counted 4 separate scanning systems, 3 biometric locks, and at least 2 weapons emplacements that were supposed to be hidden but stood out like beacons to anyone with military experience. The final checkpoint required him to surrender his sidearm and submit to a molecular-level scan. The alien security chief, a heavily augmented Krillian with enough cybernetic implants to set off a metal detector from orbit, studied Marcus with unconcealed suspicion. Human, the security chief said, his vocal cords replaced with a mechanical synthesizer that made every word sound like a death threat. You understand that any attempt to harm the princess will result in your immediate termination. I understand that any failure to protect her will result in the same outcome, Marcus replied. The difference is that I'm good at my job. The security chief's artificialized word as they focused on Marcus's prosthetic hand. You lost those fingers killing my people. I lost those fingers keeping your people from killing mine. If you want to make something of it, we can settle up after I've completed my contract. For a moment, the corridor filled with the kind of tension that preceded violence. Then, the security chief stepped aside, his mechanical voice carrying what might have been approval. The princess is waiting. The inner chamber was surprisingly comfortable, more like a well-appointed apartment than a fortified bunker. Soft lighting illuminated walls decorated with art from across the galaxy, and the air carried the faint scent of growing things from a small hydroponic garden in one corner. It was the kind of space designed to make a young person feel safe and normal despite being surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block. Princess Lyralii sat at a small table, apparently absorbed in a complex three-dimensional puzzle that shifted and flowed as she manipulated it. She looked exactly like her photograph except for her eyes, which held depths that photographs couldn't capture. When she looked up at Marcus, he felt as if he were being examined by something far older and more experienced than the teenage girl sitting before him. "You're Captain Chan," she said. Her voice was soft but carried absolute certainty. "You've killed many people, but you take no pleasure in death. You've seen things that changed you, but you haven't let them make you cruel. You dream about the people you couldn't save more often than you dream about the people you killed." Marcus kept his expression neutral despite the accuracy of her assessment. "You're Princess Lyralii. You're in danger, and I'm here to keep you alive. Everything else is details." She smiled, and for a moment looked like the teenager she actually was. "They told me you would be direct. They said humans don't waste time with courtesy when lives are at stake. Time spent on courtesy is time not spent watching for threats. Is that why you've been calculating firing angles and escape routes since you entered this room? Or why you've already identified 17 different ways someone could breach this chamber despite all the security measures?" Marcus studied her more carefully. "How do you know what I've been thinking?" "I don't. But I know how soldiers think because I've been watching them my entire life. And I know how someone who survived what you've survived would approach a situation like this." She set aside her puzzle and stood, moving with a grace that seemed almost choreographed. "The question is whether you're here because you want to protect me, or because protecting me serves some larger purpose. Does it matter?" "It matters to me. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who saw me as a symbol instead of a person. A living representation of political stability, or genetic potential, or cultural continuity. Never just as Lyralii. Marcus found himself caught off guard by her directness. I'm here because I'm good at keeping people alive, and you need to stay alive. Whether that's because you're a person named Lyralii or a princess with valuable DNA is above my pay grade. She laughed, a sound like crystal bells that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of how young she actually was. That's the most honest answer anyone has given me in months. Honesty is easier when you don't have anything to lose. Is that what you believe? That you have nothing to lose? Before Marcus could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency lighting bathed the chamber in red, and the mechanical voice of the security chief echoed through the intercom system. All units to defensive positions. We have multiple breaches on levels 4 through 6. Unknown hostiles advancing toward the primary objective. Marcus was moving before the announcement finished, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon that wasn't there. How many ways out of this room? 2 official exits, but there's a maintenance tunnel behind the hydroponic garden that leads to the station's atmospheric recycling system. You've scouted escape routes. I've been a target my entire life, Captain Chen. I learned to think like prey long before I learned to think like a princess. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the station's superstructure, growing closer by the moment. Marcus grabbed the emergency weapon locker, using his prosthetic hand to tear through the electronic lock as if it were made of paper. Inside he found a standard council-issue plasma rifle and 2 magazines of ammunition. Stay behind me, he ordered, checking the weapons charge. When I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. When I say run, you run and don't look back no matter what you hear. Understood? Understood. But, instead of the fear he expected to see in her eyes, Marcus found something else entirely. Determination. Trust. The absolute confidence of someone who had finally found exactly what she'd been looking for. As explosions shook the facility and the lights went out, Marcus realized that protecting Princess Lyralii was going to be far more complicated than anyone had prepared him for. Not because she was helpless, but because she wasn't. And, in the darkness gathering around them, that difference might be the only thing standing between salvation and catastrophe. The maintenance tunnel reeked of recycled air and industrial lubricants, but it was better than being trapped in a room while hostile forces converged on their position. Marcus led the way through the cramped space, his enhanced hearing picking up the sound of boots and alien appendages moving through the facility behind them. The Vortak had come prepared, he counted at least 3 different species among the footsteps, which meant they'd assembled a mixed team optimized for different combat scenarios. How far does this tunnel extend? He asked quietly, pausing at an intersection where 3 different passages branched away into darkness. Princess Lyralii consulted a small device she'd pulled from her sleeve. It connects to the main atmospheric processing plant about 200 meters ahead. From there we can access the service corridors that run through the station's outer hull. And, then? Then, we find a ship and leave. I've already arranged for transportation, but the pilot won't wait indefinitely. Marcus turned to study her in the tunnel's dim emergency lighting. You arranged transportation? When? 3 hours ago, when our ship first docked. Did you really think I would put my life entirely in the hands of people who see me as a political asset? She smiled grimly. I've learned to maintain my own contingencies, Captain Chen. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the tunnel system behind them. Their pursuers had found the hidden entrance and were working to expand it enough for larger beings to follow. Marcus estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before the first hostiles reached their current position. Who's your pilot? A smuggler named Crix. Former Council Navy, dishonorably discharged for refusing to follow orders during the Meridian incident. Marcus recognized the name from intelligence briefings. The Meridian incident had involved a council fleet ordered to bombard a civilian settlement suspected of harboring insurgents. Several officers had refused the order and been court-martialed for their troubles. Some had disappeared into the criminal underworld rather than face imprisonment. Can you trust him? I can trust him to hate the council more than he loves money. Under the circumstances, that's the best I can hope for. They reached the atmospheric processing plant, a vast chamber filled with towering machines that scrubbed toxins from the station's air supply and maintained atmospheric pressure across dozens of different environmental zones. The noise was overwhelming. Industrial fans, chemical processors, and recycling units created a constant din that would mask their movement but also prevent them from hearing approaching enemies. Marcus spotted movement among the machinery and raised his weapon, then lowered it as he recognized the figure emerging from behind a massive air filtration unit. The alien was humanoid but clearly reptilian, with green-scaled skin and predatory yellow eyes. Battle scars crisscrossed his visible skin, and he moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence. "Princess," the alien said, his translator rendering the words in accented English. "You're 3 minutes behind schedule." "We encountered complications," Lyralii replied. "Captain Chen, this is Crix." The smuggler studied Marcus with professional interest. "Human military. Special forces, judging by the scars and the way you're holding that weapon." "What happened to your hand?" "Same thing that's going to happen to anyone who tries to stop us from reaching your ship," Marcus replied. Crix's laugh was a harsh barking sound. "I like him. Direct, practical, doesn't waste time with pleasantries. Very human." An explosion somewhere behind them shook the processing plant hard enough to rattle the massive machines. Emergency lighting flickered, and automated systems began announcing atmospheric breaches in a dozen different languages. "They're using shaped charges to blast through security barriers," Marcus observed. "Professional work. How many hostiles are we looking at?" Initial scans showed 12 life signs moving in coordinated formation, Crix replied. "But that was before they started using explosives. Could be more now, or could be fewer if they've taken casualties from station security." Marcus doubted station security had inflicted significant casualties. The Vortax Syndicate didn't hire amateurs, and anyone capable of breaching a council facility this quickly would have planned for automated defenses and security forces. More likely, the explosions represented the systematic elimination of obstacles between the hostiles and their target. "Where's your ship?" "Docking Bay 7, sublevel C. About 8 minutes through service corridors if we move fast and don't encounter resistance." "And if we encounter resistance?" "Then, we improvise." Smugglers are good at improvising. They left the processing plant through a service hatch that opened onto one of the station's main thoroughfares. The corridor was chaos, station inhabitants fleeing in panic, security teams running toward the disturbance, and automated systems struggling to maintain order as their networks were systematically compromised by intrusion software. Marcus realized the attack was more sophisticated than a simple assassination attempt. The hostiles were using electronic warfare to create confusion and prevent coordinated response. They wanted chaos, which meant they had a secondary objective beyond simply killing the princess. "They're not just here to assassinate you," he told Lyralii as they moved through the crowd. "If they only wanted you dead, they would have used a bomb or a long-range weapon. This is a capture operation." "Capture?" Her voice carried a note of confusion. "But," the intelligence said, the intelligence was wrong. "They want you alive, which means they want access to whatever architect technology you can control." Crix led them down a maintenance stairway that bypassed the main traffic flow. The service corridors were cleaner than Marcus had expected. Babylon Gamma's operators maintained their infrastructure well despite the station's reputation as a haven for criminal enterprises. "If they want her alive, that gives us an advantage," the smuggler observed. "They'll be more cautious about using heavy weapons or explosives near her position." "It also means they'll be persistent," Marcus replied. "A dead target stops running. A live one can be pursued indefinitely." They reached sublevel C without encountering resistance, but Marcus's instincts were screaming warnings. The docking bay was too quiet, too empty. Most of the other ships had already departed as word of the security breach spread through the station's population. Only a handful of vessels remained, including a sleek courier ship that had to be Crix's transport. "Something's wrong," Marcus said, stopping at the entrance to the bay. "The ship's clean," Crix insisted. "I've got sensors monitoring it remotely. No unauthorized life signs, no energy signatures indicating hidden weapons or surveillance equipment. It's not the ship I'm worried about." Marcus was proven right 30 seconds later when the first hostile rounded the corner behind them. The alien was unlike any species Marcus had encountered during the war, tall and skeletal, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It moved with unnatural silence, and the weapon in its hands hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus put 3 plasma bolts center mass before the creature could raise its weapon. The alien crumpled without making a sound, but Marcus knew there would be others. The Vorthack always worked in teams. "Move," he ordered, pushing Lyralii toward the ship while keeping his weapon trained on the corridor they just exited. More hostiles appeared, a mix of species Marcus recognized and several he didn't. The unknown aliens seemed to share certain characteristics: enhanced speed, unnatural silence, and weapons that fired coherent energy beams instead of plasma or kinetic projectiles. They moved with predatory coordination, covering each other's advances and communicating through subtle gestures rather than vocalizations. "What are those things?" Crix demanded as he worked to bring his ship's engines online. "Enhanced soldiers," Marcus replied, recognizing the signs from classified briefings. "Biochemical augmentation, cybernetic implants, neural conditioning." The Syndicate has been experimenting with creating perfect assassins. The perfect assassins were good, but they'd never faced a human veteran with nothing to lose. Marcus used every trick he'd learned during the war, exploiting their enhanced senses with strobing plasma bursts, using their coordination against them by forcing them into crossfire situations, and taking advantage of their silence by making enough noise to mask his own movement. But there were too many of them, and they were learning from each engagement. The surviving hostiles adapted their tactics, working to surround the docking bay and cut off escape routes. Marcus found himself running low on ammunition while the enemy seemed to have unlimited resources. "Engines are online," Crix shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "But I need 30 seconds to complete the startup sequence." 30 seconds might as well have been 30 hours under the circumstances. Marcus had perhaps 15 rounds remaining, and at least 6 hostiles were still active. They'd learned to use the docking bay's infrastructure as cover, making precise shots nearly impossible. "Princess," Marcus called without taking his eyes off the enemy positions. "Can you do anything useful with that architect technology?" "I don't know how to control it," she replied. "The incident on Thesha Prime was an accident. I was just exploring, and something responded to my presence." "Well, now would be a good time to figure it out." One of the enhanced assassins made a move toward the ship, and Marcus put him down with 2 quick shots. But the move had been a feint. While Marcus was focused on the obvious threat, another hostile had worked around to their flank. Marcus spun to engage the new target and felt something like liquid fire tear through his shoulder as an energy beam found its mark. The impact spun him around and sent him crashing into a storage container. His left arm went numb, and the plasma rifle clattered away across the deck plating. Marcus drew his backup weapon, a primitive but reliable chemical projectile pistol he'd carried since the war, and kept firing even as blood loss began to affect his coordination. "Captain!" Lyralii's voice carried genuine concern, and Marcus realized she was moving toward him instead of boarding the ship. "Get on the ship," he ordered. "Don't make this meaningless." But the princess wasn't listening. Instead, she placed her hand on one of the docking bay's interface panels, a standard system designed for basic ship-to-station communications. The panel shouldn't have responded to alien contact, but Marcus saw lights begin to flicker across its surface in patterns he didn't recognize. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every electronic system in the docking bay began operating at maximum capacity simultaneously. Lights blazed with painful intensity, atmospheric processors roared to life, and cargo handling equipment activated without human input. The hostile aliens staggered as their enhanced sensory systems were overwhelmed by the sudden chaos of signals. But something else was happening too. Marcus felt a pressure in his mind, like fingers gently probing the surface of his thoughts. Not invasive or threatening, but curious, as if something vast and ancient was trying to understand what it was encountering. "Fascinating," a voice said inside his head. Not Lyralii's voice, but something speaking through her. A species that wages war with such primitive tools yet demonstrates such sophisticated tactical thinking. "Your neural patterns are quite unlike those we remember." The princess, or whatever was speaking through her, turned toward the remaining hostiles with eyes that now glowed with pale silver light. You wish to capture this individual for her genetic compatibility with our systems. But, you do not understand what you are attempting to steal. The enhanced assassins tried to retreat, but the docking bay's systems had turned against them. Cargo handling arms swung with lethal precision, atmospheric vents released clouds of industrial coolant, and the deck plating began retracting to expose the cold vacuum of space beneath. Within moments, every hostile was either unconscious, deceased, or had fled back into the station's interior corridors. The princess stood in the center of the chaos, completely unharmed, while the alien technology around her continued to respond to her presence. 20 seconds to full engine startup, Crix announced, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus suspected the smuggler was reconsidering his involvement in this particular job. The silver light faded from Lyraliai's eyes, and she swayed slightly as if struggling to maintain her balance. Marcus caught her arm with his good hand, noting that she felt feverish despite her species' normally cool body temperature. "Are you all right?" "I think so. But, something spoke to me. Or through me. It knew things about you, about your species. It was curious about human warfare, about how you think and fight." She looked up at him with confusion clear in her expression. "What did it see when it looked at your mind?" Marcus helped her board the ship as Crix completed his startup sequence. "I don't know. But, whatever it was, it seemed to approve." The ship lifted off with the smooth acceleration of well-maintained engines, leaving the chaos of Babylon Gamma behind. But, as they climbed away from the station, Marcus realized their problems were just beginning. The princess's abilities were growing stronger, and whatever ancient intelligence was guiding them had its own agenda. "Where are we going?" he asked Crix. "Somewhere the Syndicate won't follow us. I know a place, an abandoned research station in the Kepler Drift. It's been dark for 50 years, but the life support systems still function." "Why won't they follow us there?" Crix's expression was grim. "Because it's an architect site. And, after what just happened back there, I'm starting to think that might not be coincidence." The abandoned research station hung in the void like a metallic spiderweb, its skeletal structure stretched between three massive architect pylons that pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns. Marcus had seen similar ruins during the war, but never one this intact or this active. Most architect sites were dead things, their builders vanished for so long that even their technology had begun to decay. This place felt alive, as if it were merely sleeping and might wake at any moment. Crix guided his ship through the station's docking array with practiced ease. "I've been using this place as a safe house for 5 years, he explained. "The research team abandoned it after 3 scientists suffered complete neural collapse trying to interface with the architect systems. Since then, everyone's been too scared to come back." Marcus studied the station's massive central chamber through the viewport. The space was dominated by a crystalline structure that twisted up through multiple levels like a frozen tornado. Lights flickered deep within its core, following patterns too complex for human comprehension. What were they researching? Communication protocols. The theory was that if you could learn to speak with architect systems, you could unlock their databases and gain access to technologies that would revolutionize galactic civilization. Crix's laugh was bitter. Turns out the architects weren't interested in talking to just anyone. Princess Lyralii pressed her face to the viewport, studying the alien architecture with intense fascination. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like a song made of light and mathematics." "You can see patterns in it?" Marcus asked. "More than see them. I can feel them. Like music you hear with your bones instead of your ears." She turned toward him with eyes that reflected the station's strange luminescence. "Whatever spoke through me on Babylon Gamma, it's here too. Waiting." The docking procedure completed without incident, but Marcus remained tense as they prepared to board the station. His shoulder wound had clotted during the journey, but the injury limited his mobility and made him acutely aware of how dependent he'd become on his artificial fingers. The prosthetics functioned perfectly, but they were military hardware designed for war, not the delicate work that protecting someone might require. "Station atmosphere is nominal," Crix reported, checking his instruments. "Gravity at standard galactic, temperature comfortable for most species. Whatever's keeping this place running, it's been doing a good job for half a century." They cycled through the airlock into a corridor that stretched away in both directions, curving gently to follow the station's ring structure. The walls were covered with displays showing incomprehensible data streams, but Marcus noticed that some of the symbols seemed familiar, not because he understood them, but because they resembled notation he'd seen in Princess Lyraliai's personal effects. "This way," she said without waiting for guidance from Crix. "The central chamber is." She paused, frowning. "How do I know which direction the central chamber is?" "You're interfacing with the station's navigation systems," Marcus realized. "Just like you interfaced with the docking bay controls." "But I'm not trying to. It's just happening." They followed her lead through corridors lined with abandoned research equipment and empty laboratories. The scientists who'd worked here had left in a hurry. Marcus found personal belongings scattered among professional instruments, and several workstations still displayed active research data from decades past. Whatever had driven them away, it had been immediate and terrifying. The central chamber was even more impressive from the inside. The crystalline spire rose through the station's core like a living thing, its surface covered with flowing patterns of light that responded to their presence. As they entered, the patterns shifted and intensified, creating geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. "Incredible," Lyraliai breathed. "It's been waiting for someone like me for so long that it almost forgot how to hope." "You're speaking for it now," Marcus observed. "Not just translating thoughts, but expressing emotions. It doesn't experience emotions the way we do." "But loneliness is a mathematical concept it understands very well." The spire pulsed with sudden brilliance, and Marcus felt that familiar pressure in his mind. But this time, instead of gentle curiosity, he sensed something approaching desperation. The ancient intelligence was trying to communicate something urgent, something that couldn't wait for proper protocols or careful translation. Images flooded his consciousness, vast fleets of ships unlike anything in current galactic databases, star systems being systematically consumed by clouds of self-replicating machines, entire civilizations fleeing across impossible distances while something relentless pursued them through the void. The visions carried emotional overtones of loss and regret so profound that Marcus staggered under their weight. "The Devourers," Lyraliai said, her voice hollow with inherited memory. "They came from outside this galaxy, from spaces between galaxies where matter behaves differently. The architects tried to fight them, but conventional weapons were useless. So they built something else. Something designed not to destroy the Devourers, but to hide from them." "Hide how?" Crix asked. The smuggler had drawn his weapon but seemed uncertain what to aim it at. "By reducing this entire galaxy to a lower energy state. Making it effectively invisible to entities that exist primarily in higher dimensional space." She turned toward Marcus with eyes that now held the weight of cosmic history. The process required precise genetic markers to control, and the architects knew it would take millions of years to develop a species with the right neural architecture. So they seeded worlds with genetic templates and waited. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. Your people weren't just compatible with architect technology. They were specifically designed to operate it. Not just my people. The markers exist in dozens of species across the galaxy, but in fragmentary form. Complete compatibility requires multiple bloodlines, which is why. She stopped, her expression shifting from wonder to horror. Which is why the Vortex Syndicate wants me alive. They're not planning to use the technology themselves. Accept the full inheritance and gain the power to protect this galaxy, or refuse and watch everything burn when the barriers eventually fail. The first Guardian entered the chamber, its form stabilizing into something roughly humanoid but composed of crystalline structures that matched the central spire. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in their minds rather than as sound. "Inheritor of the template. The time of choosing has arrived. Will you accept the burden of guardianship?" Marcus watched Lyraliai struggle with the decision, seeing the weight of entire civilizations pressing down on someone barely old enough to understand her own mortality. The Guardian waited with infinite patience while she wrestled with a choice that would define the fate of trillions of beings. "If I accept," she said finally, "what happens to the people I care about? To Captain Chen and Crix? They will be honored as companions of the Inheritor. They will be given understanding of their role in the greater pattern. And, if I refuse? Then, this station will be sealed and we will wait for the next potential inheritor to emerge. The process may take millennia, during which the barriers will continue to weaken and the probability of discovery will increase exponentially. Marcus realized that regardless of her decision, their old lives were over. The galaxy they'd known was about to change in ways none of them could predict. The only question was whether they'd face the change as participants or casualties. "Princess," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. That's what guardians do." She smiled then, an expression both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Thank you, Captain. That means more than you know." And, in the crystalline depths of the ancient spire, patterns of light began to swirl in anticipation of choices that would echo across the stars for ages to come. Princess Lyralii stepped toward the crystalline guardian, her small hand reaching out to touch the being's shifting surface. The moment contact was made, the entire station erupted in light so brilliant that Marcus had to shield his eyes even through closed lids. When the radiance faded, everything had changed. The princess stood at the center of what could only be described as a transformation.